We are back with today's consumer. We've been talking a lot recently about the expected impact of those tariffs, and now families are starting to feel it. E-commerce giants Temu, Shine, and Amazon, they've all started raising some prices.
Stocks soared Wednesday on news that President Trump may ease his hardline position on tariffs.
But with tariffs in effect around the world, corporate leaders are raising serious concerns about the ongoing tension and uncertainty already created. Many are now asking the White House to reconsider new tariffs that are set to come into play next month.
Hello and welcome back to the Lancaster Patriot Podcast, brought to you by futureofchristendom.org. My name is Chris Hume. I am your host. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for subscribing, liking, sharing these episodes. And if you find this content helpful at all, I encourage you to go over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. That definitely helps us get in front of more people. It allows our podcast to be sorted near the top when people are searching for biblical content, current events from a biblical perspective. So please leave us a review. It can be a 1-star review. It can be a 5-star review. Just leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. So I'd greatly appreciate that. If you're a regular listener or even a infrequent listener, I'd appreciate your thoughts and feedback. So leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Well, we're talking about tariffs, and just a few days ago, President Trump posted this on Truth Social. He said, "When tariffs cut in, many people's income taxes will be substantially reduced, maybe even completely eliminated. Focus will be on people making less than $200,000 a year. Also, massive numbers of jobs are already being created, with new plants and factories currently being built or planned. It will be a bonanza for America. The External Revenue Service is happening." Well, there's a lot to comment on there, and we won't even be able to get into President Trump's specific comments. Of course, the claim that new plants and factories are currently being built or planned in response to the tariffs is very interesting because it takes a long time and quite a bit of capital and a lot of forethought to make an investment like that. And if it's contingent upon tariffs, that could change in a year, certainly could change with the next election. So no business owner that I know, I challenge anyone to find a business owner who enjoys the uncertainty of tariffs. They're going to be here this term, they're going to be gone the next. That doesn't give a business owner much confidence in planning for the future. But be that as it may, we want to get into tariffs on this episode. And to do that, I'm going to, in just a moment here, get on the line with one of my old professors. He's an economics professor. I had him at Wesley College in Delaware. Now he's at Penn State, Abington. But we're going to get him on the line to discuss tariffs. Now, before we do that, I just want to make a couple brief comments. It is true that tariffs do something. It's certainly the case that if we implement tariffs, it's going to cause something to happen. There's going to be changes. It's going to impact society, just as with any forced taxation. And that's what a tariff is. And I hope that'll be clear here when we get our guest on the line. A tariff is forced taxation. It's a tax. It does not generate revenue. That's a misnomer. Anytime the government talks about generating revenue, it's a misnomer. It's not revenue, but it does gather money. It does take money from one group and give it to another. So it does do that. It does something. It also does shake things up. That's certainly true. But so would me going over to my neighbor's garden. He has a really nice garden, by the way. I'm not a very good gardener. He is a master gardener. One year he let us go over there and just pick all his excess stuff, and it was phenomenal. But so me going over to his house and taking all his crops and taking his Corvette, that would certainly generate quote unquote revenue for my family, and it would shake up the economy on our street. So there's no question that tariffs are going to do something. We're going to see the impact one way or another. I was just speaking with someone who was sharing that there's a serious decline in ships coming into port, I think in Seattle. Normally this is a bustling port, and there's been no imports coming in for I'm not sure how many days. So we're going to feel and see the impact of this. And it might take some time, but we will see it. So yeah, tariffs do something, but what do they do? And more importantly, are tariffs righteous? Are they just? So there's two primary questions regarding any policy that we need to ask, especially one which involves the force of the sword. And anytime we're talking about forced taxation, we are talking about the force of the sword, that if you don't pay this, you will be punished. So the first question we need to ask from the biblical theonomic perspective is this just? Is it righteous? Is it righteous to use force in this case? Every situation needs to be judged by the revealed Word of God. That is the standard that we go to say, is this action, is this use of force authorized by the risen, the ruling, the reigning Christ? That is a question. Now, when it comes to forced taxation, which again, a tariff is a form of forced taxation, the question is this authorized by Scripture? Now, we're not going to be able to get into that today. That's not the line of questions I have for my guest. We're going to be talking more about the impact of tariffs and what they are, and I'll get to that in a minute here before I get them on the line. But I just want to lay the foundation for my listeners from the theonomic perspective. As you know, I'm coming from that perspective. I want to share a quote from my book, 7 Status Sins. And if you want a further and a deeper dive into forced taxation, and tariffs, again, fall under that category of forced taxation, I encourage you to check out, I believe it's chapter 3 in 7 Status Sins. We also have podcast episodes on taxation. But let me read a portion from 7 Status Sins right here regarding forced taxation. The civil government is authorized to receive a small uniform head tax, but is it authorized to punish those who are not willing or able to pay? 3 witnesses testified to the contention that failing to pay a civil tax is not a crime that the civil magistrate is authorized to prosecute. The witnesses are listed here in order of ascending strength. Number 1, the context of military service in theocratic Israel. The context in which the head tax was instituted was voluntary. So I explained in the book how military service was voluntary in Scripture, and it should be today, and that was the context in which the head tax was given. Number 2, the application of the head tax within the pages of Scripture is voluntary as well. So then as you see it applied throughout Scripture, you always see it being voluntary. And number 3, again, an ascending strength here. So the strongest argument, in God's law, no civil penalties are attached to a failure to pay taxes. This is important because penalties are attached to other sins, thus allowing us to legitimately label the following as not only sins, but civil crimes: murder, Leviticus 24:17, blasphemy, Leviticus 20:16, and theft, Exodus 22:6, to name a few. So that's the foundation. I'm not going to spend much more time on that on this episode. But secondarily, and this is important, but it is secondary, what is the impact of this policy? Will it bring about justice and righteousness? And this is something I've spoken on briefly before. The primary question is, does the Word of God authorize this action? Is it just and righteous? Secondarily, we're not saying it's not important, but it must be second, is the consequences. And this is where we get into consequentialism. Consequentialism is the ethical theory that the ends, the consequences, is the ultimate standard by which you judge an action. So if in the end it turns out for good, then the action itself is by definition good, according to consequentialism. That's not the biblical framework. We do place an extremely high value on the consequences, on the fruit of things, on the what happens on the impact of a policy, but that must be secondary to the primary question of, is this just and righteous? Now, we're sometimes charged as theonomists as being biblicists and refusing to refer to things outside the Bible and actually study a matter. So some of the charges I've heard against the theonomic position regarding anything would be, you theonomists are not looking at the facts and studying the matter, and you're just burying your head in the Bible and saying, well, since the Bible doesn't authorize the tariff, it's bad. And you theonomists are not doing any study. It's a lazy approach because it allows you to just say, well, the Bible doesn't say it, so we can dismiss it. And I think that is a straw man. That is not the approach, certainly, that I take. It's not the approach we take at Future of Christendom. And it's not the approach I'm even taking in this episode. And that's one of the reasons why I'm bringing on this guest, because he actually doesn't agree with me on some of the primary questions. We disagree on certain things regarding the theonomic position. That would not be his position. To be fair, that's not where he's coming from. And so everything that he says, I would say, falls into the category, or most of the things that I heard from him, and I'm assuming that he'll say here, will fall into the category of, okay, what is a tariff and what are the consequences of it? How does it actually work? So as theonomists, there's no reason we should run from those questions. And it's certainly not something that I do or Luke does or Matt Kennitzer or Joel Saint. We're certainly willing to say, okay, if we apply biblical law, what are the consequences? And if we don't, if we apply a man-made system, what are the consequences? And in fact, that's one of the most exciting and encouraging things to do as a Christian, is see how the Bible applies to life and see the fruit of it. So we're certainly not averse to looking at things outside the Bible, studying a matter. This is kind of the argument with natural law. You biblicists, you theonomists don't want to study an issue, and so it's easy for you just to dismiss it. And that's not the case. It's simply false, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to have my professor on here to discuss this. So I'm going to disagree, and I'm not going to get into probably those disagreements today. That's not the point of this. But the theonomic, I'm going to disagree with him on his foundation, perhaps on his on the first question that I asked. That the primary question for me is it authorized? Is it just according to Scripture? And then I would expect that if I'm properly understanding the Bible, I would expect then the consequences of any action that is unjust, of anything that goes against Scripture, to have bad fruit. It's sort of like the creationism thing. I believe in what would be considered young earth creationism, just if you had to give it a label. And I think that's what the Bible teaches. Now, sometimes it takes time and effort to see how that applies in the real world, like to see, okay, given that the Bible says this, what do we do with genetics? What do we do with the fossil record? What do we do with all these things? What I find is the more you study those things, which are quote unquote, they're outside Scripture, the more you find that they align with the biblical position. I think it's the same in matters of justice. It's sort of a different approach, obviously, from geology or fossils or genetics, but it's the same concept that the Bible gives us the standard. The Bible gives us the answers to the primary category questions. Is this just? Is it righteous? Is it a course of action that we are authorized to take, specifically using the force of the sword? And if it's not, then let's study it, let's look at it, and let's use those arguments to hopefully convince people, hey, don't do this, don't take this approach that is man-made and not based on the Word of God. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in this episode. I've already briefly laid the foundation of why, and I've done it on other episodes, so I'm not going to rehash that, on why forced taxation is not authorized. Now I want to say, okay, given that, look what happens when we push it. Look at a policy, tariffs, which is forced taxation, and let's consider the consequences. So in a moment, I will have my professor on the line here, and I'm going to focus on tariffs as taxation because that's what they are. And some people might want me to get into other discussions regarding China, the idea of China like buying up American assets, but that's really a different discussion. With or without tariffs, you could have that issue. So, and that's one I'd be happy to address from a theonomic perspective. Hopefully we can get into some more international issues down the road, but we can't have every discussion at once. So we're going to focus on the specific issue of tariffs, and I hope the conversation will be helpful. So in just a moment, I think we're about ready to get this Dr. Oak Pongsree is his name. Get him on the line. But first, I have a brief word about an upcoming event hosted by Future of Christendom. I'm definitely looking forward to this. This is the Theonomy Symposium to be held right here in Lancaster County in Ephrata, Pennsylvania at Woodcrest Retreat. This is on May 17th. It's a Saturday. It's going to be a one-day event from 8:30 to 4 p.m. And go over to futureofchristendom.org/events. You can get registered. It's just $5. We're not making any money on this. We're just trying to we only have a few seats. We only have 100 seats, really. So the people that sign up, we want to make sure they're interested in coming, and we have a seat for them. So I think we're almost at halfway. So I really encourage you to get your ticket now if you would like to come to this symposium. I think it's going to be an excellent event. We're going to have addresses from Andrew Horvath, Matt Kennitzer, Joel Saint, Henry Karish, Luke Saint, and myself. And we will also have some mock cases and a panel discussion. Check that out, futureofchristendom.org/events. All right. Well, now I am joined on the phone by Oak Pongsree, known simply as Dr. Oak. He is a professor of economics at Penn State University, Abington. Dr. Oak holds a Ph.D. in economics from Michigan State University. He is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and most importantly to me, he was my favorite professor when I was studying business at Wesley College in Delaware. Dr. Oak, it's great to connect again. Thank you for joining the show. And I'd like you to help our listeners understand the economics of tariffs. How would you begin to explain tariffs to someone who has no idea what we're talking about here?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Oak, and thanks for the kind introduction, Chris. So for someone who has no idea what tariff is, I would have to start from nothing, right? So tariffs are taxes. So if you know what a tax is, you already know what a tariff is. The only difference is just that tariffs are only imposed on anything, any item, anything at all that is crossing any international political border. And that's just that. So a tariff on import, from the importing nation's perspective, would be when the importing nation's government is collecting a tax on any item that is crossing the border into that nation. Right. So just like how you would pay tax on any particular item, instead of thinking about tax on gas or tax on cigarettes or tax on booze, it is now tax on anything at all that crossed the border into the U.S. from the U.S. perspective, being that we are the importing nation in question. So that's that.
So, Dr. Oak, the tariff is a tax in our context by the U.S. government on the U.S. people, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and this money goes where?
To the U.S. government.
Okay, so that's a great place to start, because I think a lot of people are confused off the bat about tariffs, and they think that it's a penalty, a direct penalty on the other nation. They're like, well, yeah, let's charge China more money to send their products here, but it is actually at the baseline level a tax by the U.S. government on the U.S. people, at least in our context here as the importing nation, as you mentioned. But I mean, many people justify tariffs, and one of the reasons they give, Dr. Oak, is that, well, we need to build up domestic industry. We need to buy American, and so tariffs are justified because it's going to help the American economy. Do you agree with that?
That's not even for me to agree or disagree. That's just as a matter of factually just flat out untrue.
Okay, explain that.
So, a tariff on any imported good, think of any good at all, aluminum, steel, car, will reduce the amount of that particular imported goods coming into the U.S. So, it will save some jobs in only those particular industries. So, let's think car. So any tariff or any trade restriction for, as a matter of fact, on cars would mean that we would buy less Japanese, German cars. We being the American consumers, right? We don't even have to go as far as, and I think everyone knows this. If that's the case, then every car in the U.S. would go up in price. So we're going to pay. Consumers are going to pay. Now,
why would they go up in price, Dr. Oak? Why would the American cars go up? Just for our listeners who are new to this. Do you mean the American cars that are produced here? Yeah, let's say we get these tariffs way up so that the tax on us is so onerous that nobody is buying these cars from overseas. Why is the price for American cars going to go up?
The simplest explanation would be to say that the supply of cars overall would go down, and when we have less of anything, the price would necessarily go up. So that would be the simplest term to say it. It's not just that though, because every price is a product of competition. The more competitive any industry is, as I think anyone would know intuitively, the more competitive any industry is, the lower the price, right? Okay. The American car makers being shielded from having to compete with the foreign counterparts by having this high tariff, however high it may be, the more shielded they are, the higher the price. It's just that simple. There's other ways to explain it too, but I think this is probably the most intuitive way to explain it.
Okay.
In my mind.
So we have tariffs, we have taxes on everything that's imported, not just the final product being a car, for example, but steel, aluminum, rubber, whatever it is. The idea here with these tariffs is to, as I hear it, the idea is to ultimately discourage American consumers from buying these products from overseas in order to, as it were, force them to buy American, which would then make us as Americans less reliant upon these other nations. And the fear is, well, if we're dependent upon these other nations for our products and for our goods, then we're sort of at their mercy. So maybe we should, the argument goes, raise all these prices as a result of these tariffs in order to kind of force the American economy to respond. Will that work?
No. See, now, when you put things in that way, there are many arguments going on at the same time there. So let me go back to the original argument, because the original argument was not necessarily strictly about us relying on them, but more so about how we were going to save some jobs in the U.S. Right. So let's go back to that. My point at the original point there was that even if we save some jobs in Michigan, say for cars, we're going to pay dearly for it by having to pay a higher price for car, every one of us, the American consumers. But that's not my concern, I don't think. Your original question was that, is it true that we're going to preserve our American economy by saving jobs? And my response of not true does not have anything to do with the consumers paying more. Consumers paying more is a separate thing. The way to explain that, as a matter of fact, we're not gonna create any more jobs in the U.S. by not buying Japanese cars is as follows. Every car that is being brought in from Japan or Germany or wherever is being paid for not by American dollars, but rather by an American export. Okay, every trade at the end of the day is not stuff for money. Rather, it's stuff for stuff. Quid pro quo, this for that. Okay, so the point is, when you buy an import, I don't care if it's a car, a steel, or whatever, when you buy an import from any foreign nation, ultimately they're expecting for us to send them our export. So to decrease the amount of imports coming in is to, at the same time, as a matter of factly, reduce the amount of export going out to them. So we're not saving American car, steel, aluminum jobs. We're only giving them more jobs at the expense of other jobs in, say, Iowa, Idaho, because we're going to send out less potatoes and corn. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the first issue that came up today. Namely, are we really going to create any more jobs in the U.S. by putting up these tariffs just so that we have to buy American cars? That would be successful. Yes, we're going to have to buy American cars now because all the cars are coming in. Like, we have 2 cars coming in from Japan, and only like Bill Gates can buy those 2 cars because it'll be so damn expensive, right?
All right.
So the rest of us will have to buy like American cars. Yeah, sure. But at the same time, we're going to send out less corn and potatoes from the US of A to other nations as well. So people tend to have this idea. I was just talking about this in my class just this past week too, because this is a hot topic. And anytime I have any hot topic out there, I have to bring to class, as you know. So trade deficit is one thing that people have this fear that we're gonna die because we have so much trade deficit against China or something like that. But all trade deficit is that the Chinese people are sending us more stuff than we're sending them. And all that means is that we have more stuff to consume, eat, and utilize than the Chinese people have from us. If that's the deal, and that's the end of the day, and that's the deal I'm gonna have to deal with, I would love that deal, because it means that I don't have to sweat so much working in order to get whatever the hell I want to get at the end of the day. Because consuming, utilizing, using, eating, that's the fun part. Producing is not. It's a pain in the butt. I think they're concerned about the trade deficit because the media narratives are making them concerned about the trade deficit. There's many political players here, if you will. I mean, if I can venture into politics a little bit, this is nothing to do with the left versus the right, but just hear me out here, because people who direct narratives are the people who make us fear certain things when there's nothing to fear. I don't know if I'm explaining this clearly enough, but the idea that we have to fear import is not really coming from the consumers, I don't think. Like, we enjoy imports. Just look around. All these imported goods that we enjoy a lower price and high quality all benefit us, right? So it shouldn't be something that we fear, but the fear that's being created in the media, the narratives, because this is how the pen is directing the source, if you get that saying, right? And what they're saying is that, see, imports are going to make us go to hell or whatever, because if they're making stuff and we're not making stuff, then to that extent we're not rich because we don't have the money. But no one really cares about the money because we care about stuff that we eat at the end of the day. But I insist that people fear these things, not because there's anything to fear, but rather it's because there's political agenda and there's media narrative that make us fear these things, because the people who direct the narrative have all the political reason to try to make the people fear these things.
Mm-hmm. So before we move on to some other arguments, because I know there's another approach that you were going to address there, but just for a minute, I think this is still on the category of, we need to keep jobs in America. We need more jobs in America. We don't have enough jobs. We need to bring the jobs back to America. That's the talking point. You're saying, though, actually, if we by forcing people to pay more for products, we're not going to create more jobs. And does comparative advantage come into this at all? I mean, like if America could produce the products that we're currently importing, let's just say maybe the raw materials that we need as Americans to produce whatever it is we produce, because obviously, to your point, we're producing something. Otherwise, people wouldn't be sending us all their stuff. So we're producing something. But if we force Americans to pay more for certain products, are we going to be producing the things that we produce the best, or are we going to have to try to produce things that we don't do very well?
That's the key there, right? Because certain things are a comparative advantage. That's the main thing about international trade. So if you leave the world alone, people would tend toward producing things in which they have what we call, as economists, a comparative advantage. And all that means is that resources have to be allocated correctly. And when people in any nation are left or are forced to produce things in which they don't have an advantage in producing, that particular nation now would have to reallocate the resources from other places to that particular production unjustifiably, because it's too expensive to make there, right? So if you have, for example, tariff, I go back to cars always because home is Michigan to me, so it's always cars when I'm talking about these things. So let's suppose that we don't have enough car jobs. I suppose people would say that back in Michigan anyway, and we try to prevent cars from coming in from Japan and Germany and anywhere else. We now in the U.S. are going to have to direct the resources. What resources? I don't care. Energy, power, water, whatever resources that you need to use in order to produce more cars in Michigan. But that would be drawing resources from things in which we have, as you say, a comparative advantage. Suppose these are corn and wheat, and usually we do because we have a lot of land, farmland in particular. So generally speaking, we have like a comparative advantage in making corn and wheat and soybeans and stuff like that, right? But now those resources are not going to stick to the soybean and the corn and the wheat. They're going to have to be redirected to Michigan in order for us to make more cars. Now that's going to benefit the car makers in Michigan, and this is why I went to politics just 2 minutes ago, because all the people in Michigan are going to politically lobby for this because they benefit. And the unseen thing would be the people in Iowa and Idaho and Nebraska losing the corn and the wheat and soybean and potato jobs. And they don't even know why they lose these jobs, right? Because when the resources are not being allocated to them, but to Michigan instead for cars, they don't really see it. See, this is what economics is all about. You have to think about the unseen, and this is the unseen part of it, where we're now going to be left a lot poorer because we're directing the resources that should be going to corn to cars instead.
Would this apply, Dr. Oak? Would this sort of be the broken window fallacy?
Yes, absolutely. So if you know, can I give you like more A's?
Well, I'd love for you to. I want you to explain it for the audience, though.
This was a while back. You took my class. Yes, this is the broken window fallacy, just flat out, right on the money. So the broken window fallacy is the idea that there's some unseen thing that you have to think about. And this is why sometimes if you look at statistics and want to do things empirically, this is not going to work with anything economists have to talk about, because statistics cannot show the unseen, right? And broken window fallacy has absolutely everything to do with the unseen. You don't see the things you lose because you never have it to begin with, right? So yes, the broken window fallacy, yes.
Can you share that, like the actual example in the broken window fallacy?
The actual example. So
for our
the
listeners.
Broken window fallacy, you know, if this was like a Zoom interview, or I can show you stuff. I have a lot of stuff here to show you. This is a book by, it's the book called The Lie. I actually have it right here. If I could show it to you, you just see it. And this was written by Frederick Bastiat, who was a French economist, Bastiat, Bastiat, if you want to look that up. I'm sure you know this, Chris, but just for the audience. Sure. And the broken window fallacy came out of his idea, right? The idea is that this is a macro thing more than anything, broken window fallacy, because people tend to think that when we break windows or when we have war in the context of fixing a recession and things like that, the economy can grow because we have to employ people in the war activity. Right. So if you learn, or if you, as I say, if you were brainwashed correctly or properly in high school, right, you would have been led to believe that World War II, for example, took us out of the Great Depression. And that statement alone is the broken window fallacy, because the idea is that when we have war, this is the fallacy. When we have war, we have to employ people and put resources into fighting the war, and everyone would be rich because everyone would have income, and that income would create more income, a Keynesian economist type thing, and we would get rich from that. The broken window fallacy pointed to the fact that anytime you have any more spending on anything, nothing is free. It has to come from somewhere. So if you break window and create a war, you're not making an economy better, because even though you might have to call the repair person to come and fix the window, that money into fixing the window would be otherwise spent on other things. And I think in the example by, I think it was Henry Hazlitt, he said that the money would be spent on, I think it was a pair of shoes or shirts or suits or something along those lines. I have his book as well here, but I can't show it to you. But that's the sense of the broken window fallacy, right? So creating job in Michigan is not coming free. Just to apply that to the task at hand here, it comes at the expense of other jobs lost in Idaho and Iowa.
Right, and I would say that in this case we have the civil government basically and picking and choosing the winners, and a lot of people got upset about that, rightfully so, when they would bail out, one of the car manufacturers. But now here, they're essentially saying, look, it's more important for us to be able to, for example, it doesn't really matter what the product is, but make more cars as opposed to X. Because to your point, that it comes at the price of something. So if we're going to shift jobs to car manufacturing, we're going to lose jobs in another area. And who's to say that it would be better for us to be making cars than the other product? Obviously, right. Go ahead.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but
no, please do.
I can say absolutely. You were saying that who's to say that making cars is better than making corn? I will say that absolutely making corn is better if people were making corn to begin with, because there's two ways to make cars, and you're right. I mean, I keep talking about cars just because Michigan is home to me, but it could be any product. It doesn't really matter what the product is, but I can say that making corn and trade that for cars coming in from Japan and Germany is better. If people chose to do that, it must be better, or else they would have just bought American cars to begin with.
Right. And I do encourage our listeners to check out the broken window fallacy. Yeah, on the surface, if the government goes around and breaks a bunch of windows, people are going to see, oh, well, look at all these jobs that are created now. All these window repairmen are out there having work that they didn't have before. But what they don't see is all the production that could have been with the money that now these business owners have to spend on fixing their window, when now the business owners aren't using their resources for what they do well. Now they have to pay the window repairman. So I think that's extremely helpful. What was the other thing we're going to talk about here? I brought up two things. I mean, one was trying to get more jobs in America. I guess the other may have been being dependent on other nations. We kind of covered that. Anything else you want to add to that?
okay, let me go back to the job, and then I'll come to the being dependent. I understand, and people talk about jobs a lot, like creating jobs. And every time we run into some election cycle, any political candidates would just try to come and try to convince you that they can create jobs. Job creation seems to be like the end all be all type thing. So I can't help it. I got to talk about this because jobs are not end all be all. Okay, jobs are not goals. Jobs are pain in the butt. If I had a switch that I could flip and have anything that I can have, I would flip that switch to have a situation where there's no jobs needed at all. Okay, no one has to do anything. They can just snap your fingers and a bicycle would pop up. Snap your finger and a car would pop up. Jobs are pain in the butt. Jobs are not in all be all. If you want to create jobs, here's what you do. And I get this from the late Milton Friedman. Just want to give him the credit. You, instead of having all this equipment and gear and whatnot in order to build a house, you give everyone a toothpick. Okay, they'll have job for the next 50 years.
Right.
They will not have a house, but they'll have jobs. Jobs are pain in the butt. If you just destroy all the technology, everyone will have plenty of job, but no one will have anything to eat. So jobs are not the main thing. Production is the main thing. Okay, we want to have as fewer jobs as possible and as many things to consume as possible. That's what we want. So that's jobs for you. So that I'm done with the job rant. Now back to, I have to write down what I have to talk about here. You can't see this, but because I tend to give you too many rants. But okay, so being dependent, that's what we're going to talk about now, right? I'm dependent on Walmart. I'm so dependent on Walmart. And in fact, right now I have a trade deficit with Walmart. Like I don't have, in fact, they don't buy anything from me at all, Walmart. I keep buying stuff from them. I don't see any reason of anything wrong of being dependent. The whole thing about trading with people is to be dependent on other people. Okay, so the whole reason of us being able to specialize in certain things, and if you look around, you don't do that many things. You do just one or two things. Me, what do I know? I know nothing else, just economics, nothing else. I'm writing, I'm reading, I'm talking like this, I'm giving interviews, but I teach, but I don't do anything else much, really. Right? Why? How is that possible? Because of the idea that I can depend on other people to make other things for me. Could I just become someone who is not dependent on anyone at all and start having a backyard where I have cows and pigs. And then in the morning, I start going out there and start killing pigs for bacon and start, just doing this thing to the cows. I don't know what you call it with the udder to get milk.
Yeah, milk
the cow. That's what it is. Okay. Can I do that? Yeah, but could you imagine the inefficiency of my life? I would have to spend the whole entire 3 hours in the morning to make breakfast. Right. And then 4 more hours to make lunch. And at the end of the day, I would just accomplish absolutely nothing. Right? So why fear being dependent when, if you just think about it, being dependent is the key to live.
Yeah.
Likewise, if you apply that to the whole nation, it's the same thing, because nations, it's just a collection of individuals, right? If these individuals can make better things by exploiting the comparative advantage, making corn and wheat and soybeans, and then trade those things for cars in return, what's so wrong about depending on other nations to make car from us, for us, right?
Well, what if China? So what if their plan down the road is to cut off all this stuff, make us dependent on them, and then they stop selling us everything, and then what do we do? What would you say to that?
There's other nations, I would think, right? So this is what they call, in the international trade and international economics area, we call this the national security argument.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So usually falls upon steel. Steel is usually steel industry was among the first one who brought up, and the steel industry in the U.S. is always bringing up stuff like this anyway, because they want to be protected, they want to be shielded from the from the international competition, right? So if that's the case, we still have a lot of steel industries in here anyways. It's not down to zero, right? So that's one. And this is what we call the national security argument. Namely, the idea is that there's certain things where if we don't keep it to ourselves or produce it ourselves, then other nations can just attack us once they become the world dominion or something like that. Take steel then. Steel does not come from just China, I don't think. Or if you can think of any good, it does not come from just one nation. I would think that other nations would be more than happy if China were to say, you know what, we're not selling steel to the U.S. anymore. The Mexican steel makers would just step up and say, sure, we'll sell it to you. Mm-hmm. Right? At the end of the day, I think economic gains in selling steel to us would trump many other things, I think. So if we have just maybe two other nations, now I don't know the statistics of steel, but I would want to bet that there's other nations that are supplying steel to us. Just to name maybe England or maybe Mexico or something like that. And if China's going to say, you know what, we're not selling you steel anymore, what is that going to mean? This is going to mean that the Mexican steel and the British steel are going to even be more expensive, which incentivize these two particular nations to want to sell it to us even more.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, that's helpful. What about the argument that we need tariffs to address the unfair trade practices by other nations? So, and this kind of goes with the idea of, well, if we tariff our people, if we tax our people, then that'll make the other nations stop with the tariffs on their own people. And things are not fair right now, so we need to do the tariffs just for a time to make them fair.
Okay, so a couple of things here. Why do we make the American consumers pay for all this? Like, I think, okay, let's take cars, steel, aluminum. The people in these particular industries are not particularly poor, I don't think. The consumers who end up paying for these things are the poorer counterparts. I would want to bet. Now, you might have to look into whether or not that's true, but I think the poor American consumers who and by poor, by world standard, we're not poor. No person in the U.S. is that poor, but still, if you just think about the American people, the poor counterparts are the ones that want to stretch the dollar the furthest possible. But anytime you make anything more expensive, the poor people are harmed the most. So we're making them pay. We know that we're making them pay. That's one. Two, right now, if any nations around the world are trying to make it unfair on whom? Unfair on the American producers, because they send things to us at a cheaper price. I think that's the idea there. So, for example, if the Chinese central bank is manipulating their own currency in some way that it makes it cheaper for the American consumers to buy the Chinese goods, I think that's the unfairness that people see. I'm not sure if that's like too fast in explaining that, but I think that is among the unfair practices that the American government is accusing the Chinese of doing, I think, right? So, and you can see why some American producers think that that's unfair, because the American consumers are buying Chinese goods like crazy because it seems cheap to us, right? Mm-hmm. And that would be the unfairness. Why is that bad for the American people? We're buying stuff at a lower price, we just said. Right now, if that's the unfairness that we're seeing, the Chinese consumers are paying. They're subsidizing the American consumers by having things being so cheap to come here. So we are being subsidized by the Chinese government to get more stuff at a lower price and at a higher quality as well, not to mention. Why is that a bad thing? To put a tariff on this so that we would be fair is to punish the American consumers for this, that we didn't do anything wrong, right? That's two. Number three, if we put the tariff on all these things coming in, it is as if you think of this as a global economy, and it isn't a global economy, it is as if we have a boat, and in that boat, there's some Chinese and some American. And the Chinese are saying, you know what, global trade sucks, we shouldn't have it, we're just going to poke a hole in the boat. And here comes the American people. The boat's sinking. And is it wise for us to poke more holes? Because that's what the tariff does. The boat is sinking fast already. You don't want to sink any faster. Okay. So no, I say no to tariffs because it makes us poorer as a global community.
We have these intended goals for the tariffs, right? They're talked about like yes, it might cause some temporary pain. It might hurt in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to bring about these good ends. It's going to equalize things. It's going to bring more jobs to America. We've already covered that, but are there any other less obvious or unintended consequences that occur when the government gets involved with things like this, specifically with the tariffs and this taxation, that people should really be aware of before they start promoting tariffs?
The ability for anyone to trade is what makes us wealthy. And I said wealthy now because this is now 2025. If you go back to like 1652, I just made that up. Okay, just any random year back in the past, the ability for us back then to trade was the main thing that allowed us to live. Okay, the more we can trade, the more we can advance ourselves and have a better standard of living, because it allows us to get to depend, if I want to use the term, on other people who might be better at making other things, so that we can focus our time on doing things that we're better at doing, right? So anytime, and I don't care if it's tariff or whatever else you might want to call it, anytime any force of up above, anytime anyone who has any force to force anyone to do anything otherwise is forcing people to trade less, it makes us worse off. It makes us poorer. So that should be clear at this point. So it's not just tariff; it's anything else at all. But tariff is just it's to me. If we're gonna teach our kids that everyone matters, and I think I totally agree with this. Is more of an opinion type thing. If you don't like this, then it's a different thing. But if we're gonna teach our kids that everyone matters, it doesn't matter where they are, and the color of their skin, the color of their hair and whatnot, why are we saying that people who send us stuff from halfway around the world who might look a little bit different from us is bad? We're teaching our kids some contradictory ideas if we're going to do this. If we're going to say that everyone matters and everyone was born the same and, everyone has the same right and whatnot, but then all of a sudden saying that, well, maybe we should have American people make cars and steel. That's contradicting what we're trying to teach our kids, in my mind. That's two, I think, now. Number three, and I think this is very important, nations or any communities at all that rely on each other, that are economically integrated with each other, tend to make love, not war, tend to be at peace. Okay? Peaceful nations come because they trade, come because they are interlinked, come because they are interdependent, and by that, and that should be something to think about in terms of dependence as well, because it's not dependence one way; it's a two-way thing. Okay, so nations have been engaged in less wars when they trade, and I'm not saying that there's no exception. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but just look at the broad sweep of history. When we were not trading, we fight, and when we were trading, we fought less. Okay, so if you are warmongering, then yes, okay, let's stop trading or let's trade less. But if you want the world to be at peace, I think free trade is the policy to achieve that.
I want to ask you something else, Dr. Oak. You kind of alluded to this, because we don't have time to go too deep into the kind of different views here, but I want your answer on something specific here, because there are some that are arguing, America first, and I understand as Americans we want what's best for Americans. I think my argument, and I think you would agree with me, is, well, if we want what's best for Americans, we shouldn't penalize Americans for taking dominion and serving their neighbor and buying products. But at the same time, then some people say, well, also, what China is doing to their people, the slave labor in these sweatshops, if we do the tariffs, then we're going to prevent, we're not going to take part in that immoral slave labor in sweatshops. I know you've addressed that kind of briefly in the past. Do you have anything you'd want to say on that in terms of that argument that, well, let's do the tariffs because, China is cheating because they're using, child labor?
Okay. You open like 5 cans of worm right there, which is fine.
Well, pick one.
I like worms. Okay, sweatshop. There's nothing wrong with sweatshop.
Uh-oh.
Right? There's something wrong. There's a lot of things wrong with slave shops. But we have to be able to distinguish between, on the one hand, sweatshops that are voluntary versus slave shops that are not.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think when you say sweatshops are bad, and then you're saying that well the Chinese are employing sweatshops that are this and that and whatnot, in your mind those are slave shops. But sweatshops do not need to be slave shops, right? So to just cast a net and say, well, sweatshops are all bad, I think that's unfair. Because if Nike is to open up a sweatshop in some third world country, mm-hmm. And employ only strictly a voluntary workforce, there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah,
so
I would agree.
I want to make sure that we're on the same page there. Now,
yes, I agree with that. I do. Yes.
Okay, so if we agree with that, and let's stipulate that. And I don't even know if this is true, but stipulate from what you're saying, and just take it as true that some sweatshops in China, and since you brought up China, it could be any other nation. Let's say that some sweatshops in China are employing slaves. Namely, they force them to work. We're just going to leave the child labor out of this for the time being. Let's take all adults. But let's just say that they actually force them to work where they're not agreeing to work, and this is not voluntary, and they actually exist. I would think that those incidences would be less if we allow the global community to come in. Like right now, suppose the Chinese is a closed nation. Mm-hmm. Close enough that we can't go in. Close enough that there's no international trade going on, and therefore there's no Gap factory, there's no Nike factories in China, right? Then the Chinese factory people can do anything without any transparency to the rest of the world. If you allow for more free trade, what would happen is we'd have more factories from companies around the world like Nike, Adidas, and or whatever. Right, to go in and do it right. And why do I believe that Nike would do it right? Look, if Nike is doing it wrong, they have their reputation at stake, okay? If they did something wrong in China, it doesn't matter if they did something wrong on Mars, someone will know and they're screwed, okay? So they better do it right. If they have a chance to go into China or Vietnam or whatever and have a factory, they better damn well not have any slaves there. And I'm pretty damn sure they're gonna try to the best of their ability to not. Mm-hmm. But once they're there, they're going to expose whatever the Chinese factories are in China right now are doing that otherwise would not be seen by the rest of the world if Nike was not in there.
Okay, but let's say it's not slave labor, it's voluntary, but they're paying these people pennies, and that's no standard of living. What would you say to that?
In any trade at all, it doesn't matter what the trade is. In any trade at all, there's only two parties that can say whether or not that trade is fair. The buyer and the seller. Okay. Us as a third party can say anything about it, but our opinions don't matter. If you're buying labor service from me at a price, I don't care what the price is. Both sides must gain, or else one of us would not agree to it. It must be then, by just knowing that, it must be then that the Chinese workers at that factory must be better off. There's no way around that. They gotta see that job as being the best among many. What are other jobs? Don't know. Don't care. We don't know. We're just third parties, right? That particular Chinese worker must be best off at that job. And to say that, and here's a pretext. This is why pretexts are important, because sometimes people argue about something and having the pretext implicitly that are leading to situations that are worse for these poor workers without them realizing it sometimes. So when people say, sweatshops are bad, what will happen is that's acting as a pretext for some force to come and take the sweatshops away. And when you take that away, that Chinese worker is worse off because he or she now has to go back to the job that was not as good. How do we know it's not as good? If it was better, he would have or she would have stuck with that job, right?
Right.
So I mean, I hope that's clear enough. I mean, that's a lot. That's more to say. I could have a longer version if you wanted to, but I think. Right. The main thing is to understand that any trade at all that happens between any two parties at all must benefit both, or else one party would not agree to the trade. Voluntary action, that is, right?
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, I'll have to have you back on to talk about that. But I did want you to bring it up because I think that is very helpful. As an employee or someone who is working, I am selling my labor. It is a trade. Someone's buying, someone's selling, and the employee, the laborer, is the one that's selling the labor. We got to kind of wrap this up here. And I want to give you an opportunity to kind of just tie together any loose ends and make any further arguments. But one of the things that came to my mind is with these arguments for tariffs, apply these tariffs, and it's going to essentially force certain American sectors, if you will, to respond. Okay, now it's so expensive to buy X from overseas, so this sector is going to respond and start manufacturing this. I mean, and that's going to take a lot of capital. It's going to take a lot of time. There's going to be a lot of pains there. I mean, someone's going to have to put some risk into that. A business owner has to make an investment here to shift his production or start a new business. But what happens then when the supposed goal of the tariff is accomplished and China, let's say China does eliminate their tariffs on their own people. And now what's the business owner going to do? Isn't he going to go back to eventually? I mean, obviously, initially, there's going to be so much pain and investment. I'm just concerned. I mean, why would businesses even invest millions of dollars into a new sector with the hope that the tariffs will quote unquote work and then they'll be able to get the products they were already getting from China? It just doesn't make sense to me. Am I thinking about this correctly here?
No, I think you are thinking correctly, because this depends on the political landscape too, right? Like when you're doing all these investments and things in terms of how are you going to put resources into what use? You have to think about the political landscape in the future in terms of what's going to happen. See if the powers that be have too much power. This is what you're going to have to think about. And you're going to think about, why am I doing this if I'm not even sure if it's going to work or not? Or if the next administration is going to carry through, or a bunch of other political reasons why this might not be realized at the end. So I think, yes, you're thinking along the right line, but it takes a lot of political conjecture to know what's really going to happen as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I know business owners, and they're not ones to sort of willy-nilly make a decision to risk their own capital and the future of their family unless they're confident, hey, I can provide a product here that can compete with others. And if the idea is, well, we're going to tariff these other nations, well, tariff our own people, but to prevent, so to speak, to try to prevent these other nations from competing with us, that's really a precarious situation, because, I mean, the business owner is looking at that, and that's an artificial barrier there that if that comes down, he might not be successful anymore. So anything else you want to add to this whole discussion in the final 5 minutes here? I think it's been very helpful, but anything you'd like to add to help our listeners? I don't have a lot to add. I think the main thing is to look out for false narrative. And I think people just, when you hear things and the media put the narrative right in front of us and it sounds right, people tend to just believe it right away, like at face, right? And I think people got to be more careful about listening to things and think about the narrative that are being pushed through to us. Trade deficit is one, and here's another one that you were the whole hour here. You were trying to correct what is being said out there. That is seemingly we're led to believe that the tariffs are being imposed upon foreigners. Like we're putting this tariff on the Chinese. We're putting tariff on the Chinese. But I think it's got to be understood clearly that the tariff is being pushed on us. We're paying. We're paying for this. We're paying for this. I think that's got to be said over and over and over again for people to really start to understand that a lot of times the narratives out there that are being fed to us they're just lies. So. Well, I've heard, I actually saw this. Someone posted this, and maybe it'll be a little bit repetitive, but I want to give you a chance to respond to it. Someone said this. They said, okay, I understand. They're like, look, I know that this is a penalty on us, but you know what? I love my country so much that I'm willing to pay more for eggs. I'm willing to pay more for cars. I'm willing to pay more for TVs. I'm willing to pay more for all these things if it will make America better. And if it will make America, so let's bring on the tariffs, bring on the punishment, because it's in the end, it's going to help us. So I'd like you to just kind of respond to that, summarize your thoughts, and we'll have to move on for today.
Right. So it should be clear, if we understand what we're talking about today, that you're willing to pay for this, that, and whatnot, but the benefits that you're mentioning, they're not there. When you're saying that you're willing to pay all these things in order to make America better or whatever, we're not making us better by having the tariff. The benefits that you are led to believe are benefits, they're not there. We're not creating any more American jobs than before. We're just moving jobs from Iowa and Idaho to Michigan, if we were going to go with that context. But again, don't get stuck with that context, because it could be any industry at all out there, right? But so just want to say, one, those benefits that you think are there, they're not. They're just not. Okay, so we're not making anything better by paying. That's one. And two, I might be willing to pay for certain things. It does not give me the right to force other people to pay for what I'm willing to pay. I can say all day, I can have that meme all day on TikTok or whatever, I'm willing to pay for this, that, and whatnot. It does not mean that all of a sudden I should have a right to make other people pay for what I think is good. The only thing, and sharing is caring, and I teach my kids this. The bottom line is sharing is caring only when you share what you own. If I force other people to share what I don't own, but it's what they own, that's not caring, that's theft.
Well, Dr. Oak, I appreciate it. I think that's been very helpful. This has been a great discussion on tariffs. So I want to thank you for your time, and hopefully we can have you back on here soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
All right, well, I hope you found that helpful and entertaining. Dr. Oak was, again, my favorite professor, and he was certainly not a boring professor. Every class was interesting. He loves the subject. He loved teaching it, and he still does, obviously. So, all right, just to recap a few things here and bring all this together and interject, again, some of my thoughts. Tariffs fall under the category of taxation. So if you want to remember three things as we close here. Number one, tariffs fall under the category of taxation, specifically forced taxation. The idea is not that the government saying, well, if you'd like to pay this tariff, go ahead. No, the government is going to force you, if they can, to pay this tariff, and there's their quote-unquote revenue. And the idea, I don't think anybody thinks this is going to happen, but it was in that Trump quote there that, hey, this could replace the income tax. Well, just keep in mind, it's still a tax. It's forced taxation on the people, saying you have to pay the government this or else we will punish you. So tariffs are forced taxation, number one. Number two, arguments based on what might happen if we enforce tariffs anyway, even if we say, well, you know what, they're forced taxation, you know what, they're not authorized. If we make any argument based on that to say, well, they will lead to this, ultimately then fall under the category of consequentialist arguments, which I submit is not a Christian approach to ethics, matters of justice. So if you've established that tariffs are forced taxation, if you've established that forced taxation is not authorized in Scripture, then any argument you make about, well, good might come from this, ultimately is a consequentialist argument. And number three, then, to summarize this, I would submit that tariffs are both contrary to biblical justice, and furthermore, they do not work. So some people say, well, they might disagree and say, well, no, they're not contrary to justice, biblical justice, or they might say, well, you know what, but they work. Well, I submit that they don't work, and this is sort of the argument I made at the beginning, that wisdom is justified by all her children. God's law is the best approach. And this was a clip I played on my personal channel from the guys over at Super Reform Bros, saying it's not simply the case that God's system is the best in theory. It's not just the best philosophically. It is actually the best practically. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring on Dr. Oak, someone who I don't necessarily agree with on all the points regarding the theonomic approach, but to demonstrate that practically the tariffs do not bring about blessing. They certainly do not bring about justice. And I would argue, and Dr. Oak would agree, they're not bringing about prosperity and production for Americans. So wisdom is justified by her children. Not only are tariffs unauthorized in terms of being a forced penalty by biblical law, the magistrate is not authorized to punish you for not paying them a tax on a product you buy from X nation in order to serve your family or serve your neighbor. That would be unjust. Furthermore, the application of said practice does not bring blessing. So that's a twofold argument against the tariff. And as I've mentioned, all you need is the first one, but the second one is helpful rhetorically and discussing things. And I think theonomists should be very willing to have these discussions. I think many of them have. I think if you think about Gary North and some of the other theonomists and Rushdoony and them explaining, hey, here's the humanistic approach. Here's what happens when you embrace positive law. This is what happens. And that's what we're doing here with the tariffs. Like when you embrace an unbiblical system, you will not have blessings. So I hope that was helpful. If you'd like more content on the tariffs, leave your comments, leave your objections. I'll be happy to get Dr. Oak back on if there's something we missed. Again, we didn't get into the issue of China, using American dollars. That's a discussion that you could have even if there were no tariffs or there were tariffs and China can trade with other people and get U.S. money and do stuff with that. That's a different discussion. We're talking here about forced taxation, the penalty by the American government on the American people for serving their neighbor and taking dominion. Not authorized in Scripture, and it will not bring about these promised results that many, including President Trump, are touting that the tariffs will do. So thanks so much for joining me on this episode. I've been wanting to have Dr. Oak on for a long time. I hope you found that entertaining and edifying, educational. Again, if you'd like to support this episode or support this podcast, I should say, go to patreon.com/the Lancaster Patriot. You'll get early access to these episodes as well as some bonus content. And I appreciate all the patrons. So go over to futureofchristendom.org. Again, the Theonomy Symposium is coming up on May 17th. We also have information on there about our upcoming conference in October. I encourage you to check those out. I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time, God bless, and remember that Christ, not man, is king. So long.